On an icy northern highway, traffic thunders past until a Navy SEAL sees what no one else stops for. A lost mother dog sits at the roadside, front paws pressed together as if praying to the wrong savior. Beside her, in a shattered foam box, 3 tiny puppies tremble, abandoned, only weeks old, nearly out of time. The Navy SEAL moves like an arrow, running as the mother dog leads him toward a hidden secret. He scoops the helpless puppies into his arms, and in that instant, their fates lock together. Then the days uncover a buried truth, expose a powerful lie, and reveal a quiet miracle no one expected. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, and if compassion still matters to you, like, subscribe, and stay with us. Morning in the far north of the United States arrived clean and sharp, the kind of cold that did not shout but pressed itself quietly against the skin. Pine forests lined the highway like a disciplined formation, dark green against a pale winter sky. Traffic was heavy but slow, bottlenecked by roadwork ahead, orange cones, blinking arrows, men in reflective jackets standing still as sentinels. It was the sort of place where time stretched thin, where people stared through windshields and thought about everything except where they were. Cade Rourke drove with both hands on the wheel, posture straight without effort. He was 40 years old, just over 6 feet tall, broad through the shoulders, built not like a bodybuilder, but like a man who trained because his life once depended on it. His face had the clean, angular lines of American masculinity. Strong jaw, high cheekbones, no beard to soften the edges. His dark brown hair was cut in a neat undercut, disciplined even out here. Even now. Blue-gray eyes watched the road with practiced distance, alert but not restless. People who knew him casually might have called him calm. People who knew better would have called it containment. He wore what he always wore when he drove alone. A long-sleeved camouflage combat shirt and matching trousers, the fabric worn but immaculate, fitted close to the body without restricting movement. A dark tactical belt sat at his waist, holding a small utility pouch and a holster that looked more like it carried tools than a weapon. Tan military boots rested solidly on the pedals. On his left wrist, a heavy metal watch with a black face caught the light when he turned the wheel. The outfit was not a costume. It was habit. It was armor. Cade was driving toward a small northern town called Briar Hollow, a place he had chosen precisely because nothing ever seemed to happen there. He told himself he was starting over, though he had learned the hard way that starting over was mostly a story. People told themselves to make the present bearable. He had left the Navy SEALs 6 months earlier, officially retired, unofficially unmoored. The war did not follow him home in loud ways. It came quietly, in the way he scanned rooms, in the way silence never felt empty, in the way his body stayed ready long after it was no longer required. He was thinking of none of that when he saw the dog. She stood near the median, just beyond the rumble strip, where the road widened slightly because of construction. Cars crawled past, drivers impatient, unaware. The dog did not flinch at the noise. She did not bark. She did not run. She was a German shepherd, full-grown, her coat thick and weathered, black and tan, dulled by dirt and winter. She sat upright, spine straight, head lifted. Her front paws were pressed close together, almost touching, not in some trained trick, but because she was exhausted and cold, her muscles trembling with the effort of staying upright. Beside her, half-tucked, against the concrete barrier, sat a white foam box stained with road grime. Inside it, barely visible, were 3 small shapes curled into one another. Puppies, only a few weeks old, their sides fluttering with shallow breaths. Cade eased his foot off the accelerator. He told himself it was because traffic was slowing anyway. He told himself it was because stopping on a highway was dangerous. His instincts, honed by years of survival training, cataloged the scene quickly. No owner in sight, no leash, no collar visible at first glance, construction zone limiting speed. He could keep going. He should keep going. The dog did not look at any of the other cars. She watched only him. Her eyes were a warm amber brown, steady and unsettling in their calm. There was no panic in them, no wild pleading. They held the quiet resolve of a creature that had already made every choice available to her and was now standing guard over the last one. Cade had seen that look before on human faces, in places where options ran out. He passed her. The truck rolled forward another 30 yards before his chest tightened, sharp and unexpected. His jaw clenched. He checked the rearview mirror. The dog had not moved. She still sat exactly where he had seen her, body squared to the road, gaze following the space where his truck had been. Cade swore under his breath and pulled onto the shoulder. He killed the engine and sat for a second, listening to the metal tick as it cooled, to the low hiss of tires on asphalt. This was how it always started, he thought. One small decision, one deviation. He opened the door anyway. The cold hit him immediately. He crossed the short distance to the dog with deliberate steps, keeping his posture relaxed, hands visible. The German shepherd tracked his approach but did not bare her teeth. Up close he could see how thin she was beneath the heavy coat, how her legs trembled with the effort of holding still. A faint groove circled her neck, the healed mark of a cord or rope pulled too tight for too long. "You did this on purpose," Cade murmured, not accusing, simply stating a fact. He crouched beside the foam box and peeled back the edge. The puppies were impossibly small, eyes barely open, fur still soft and uneven. They whimpered weakly at the intrusion, then pressed closer together for warmth. Cade shrugged out of his jacket without thinking and wrapped the box, tucking the fabric tight to hold in heat. He lifted it carefully. The dog rose at once, fluid and controlled despite her exhaustion, and stepped back to give him space. When he turned toward the truck, she followed without hesitation, jumped into the back seat, and sat down, posture straight, as if she had rehearsed this moment. He paused, one hand on the door, struck by the certainty of it. Not hope, expectation. As he pulled back onto the highway, his eyes caught a dull glint at the dog's throat. A metal tag hung from a worn leather collar, its surface eaten by rust. Only one letter was still legible, etched deep enough to survive. An L, or maybe an I. A beginning, not a name. The road stretched on. Pine trees gave way to open fields dusted with frost. The heater hummed. In the back seat, the German shepherd did not lie down. She sat upright, eyes forward, every inch of her focused on staying present. About 15 minutes later, Cade felt it. The sensation was familiar and unwelcome. The slow crawl between his shoulders, the tightening at the base of his skull. He glanced at the rearview mirror again. The dog had turned her head and was watching him now, not with urgency, but with something like assessment. She leaned forward slightly, her nose lifting, then pressed one paw against the back of his seat. The touch was gentle, intentional. Cade's grip tightened on the steering wheel. He pulled onto a turnout and shut off the engine, heart beating harder than the situation warranted. He rested his forehead briefly against the wheel, breathing in, out, grounding himself the way he had learned to do years ago in places where panic could get you killed. When he looked up, the dog had not moved. Her paw rested where she had placed it, steady, warm through the fabric. "All right," he said quietly. "I see you." He opened the door and stepped out, scanning the turnout and the tree line beyond. Nothing. No one. The world sat in winter silence. When he climbed back in, the pressure between his shoulders eased. The dog withdrew her paw and settled back, her job done. They drove the rest of the way to Briar Hollow without incident. By the time Cade turned down the narrow road that led toward the edge of town, the sun had climbed higher, the cold light sharpening every edge. He pulled into the gravel drive of a small rented house tucked against the forest, simple and unremarkable. He carried the foam box inside, moving carefully, setting it near the heater. The puppies stirred, small sounds filling the quiet kitchen. The German. Shepard followed him in and stood just inside the doorway, watching him with unwavering attention. Cade straightened and met her gaze. "You can stay," he said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "For now." The dog's ears flicked. She stepped fully into the house and lay down beside the box, body curved protectively around it. Cade noticed then how her breathing slowed, how tension drained from her muscles inch by inch, as if she had been holding herself together on borrowed time. He sank into a chair across from her, exhaustion settling over him like a heavy coat. Outside, the wind moved through the pines, a low, constant sound. Inside, 4 lives breathed in fragile unison. Cade did not yet know the dog's name, or why that single rusted letter felt like a warning. He did not know that the choice he had made on the side of the highway would reach far beyond this small house. He only knew that for the first time in months, something had cut through the yaw ice numbness and demanded his attention, not with noise, but with trust. And that, he suspected, was how everything important began. Cade brought the dogs into the small rented house at the edge of Briar Hollow, just as the winter sun began to lean west. The place was modest to the point of anonymity. A single story, weathered gray siding, a narrow porch facing the trees, and windows that caught the light only briefly before the forest reclaimed it. Pine woods pressed close on 3 sides, their tall trunks forming a natural wall that blocked most wind and sound. It was the kind of house chosen by people who did not want to be seen too clearly, or by those who wanted the world to feel farther away than it really was. Inside, warmth pooled slowly. Cade set the foam box near the heater, careful to angle it so the heat reached the puppies without overwhelming them. He moved with methodical precision, every action measured, as if the smallest mistake might detonate something unseen. The puppies stirred, soft sounds rising from the box, thin, uncertain, but alive. He crouched there longer than necessary, watching their chests rise and fall, counting breaths the way he once counted seconds between distant explosions. The German shepherd stepped fully into the house and paused, as if cataloging the space. She was medium-large for her breed, lean beneath her thick black and tan coat, her movements economical and controlled. Her ears remained upright, swiveling slightly as she mapped the unfamiliar interior. Only when Cade sat back on his heels did she move again, settling beside the box with deliberate care, her body curved protectively around the puppies. The tension in her shoulders eased a fraction, enough that Cade noticed. He waited a beat, then said quietly, "Vesper." The name surprised him as much as it seemed to suit her. Evening star. Something that appeared when the light began to fail, but refused to disappear entirely. The dog lifted her head, amber eyes meeting his, and did not look away. Cade nodded once, as if the agreement had been mutual. The puppies needed names, too. Something simple, something that would not demand too much from them while they were still learning how to exist. The smallest, darker than the others, he called Mika. The one with the restless paws became Pip. The third, quieter, with a pale smudge on her chest, he named Junie. Vesper watched him through the entire process, head tilted slightly, her expression unreadable but attentive. The first night passed in fragments. Cade slept in the chair near the heater, boots still on, jacket folded under his head out of habit. He woke often, sometimes to the faint whine of a puppy, sometimes to nothing at all. Each time Vesper was already awake, watching the room, her breathing steady. Once, in the early hours, he startled upright from a dream he could not remember, his heart hammering for reasons long out of date. Vesper rose instantly and placed herself between him and the darkness of the hallway, her stance calm, her presence grounding. He waited until the tension ebbed before exhaling. Morning brought pale light and the reality of logistics. Cade drove carefully into town, Vesper in the back seat, the puppies bundled securely. Briar Hollow revealed itself in pieces. A diner with fogged windows, a hardware store with a hand-painted sign, a post office that looked older than the road that led to it. People glanced at his truck without interest, then looked again when they noticed the dog. The veterinary clinic sat on the edge of town, clean but unpretentious. Inside, the air smelled of disinfectant and warm fur. The veterinarian, a woman in her late 50s named Dr. Helen Mercer, greeted Cade with professional warmth. She was tall and spare, her silver blonde hair pulled into a low knot, her movements efficient without being abrupt. Years of practice had given her a steady confidence and a quiet patience that did not rely on small talk. "These are young," she said after examining the puppies, her voice calm but focused. "Too young to be out in this weather." Vesper stood nearby, eyes fixed on the doctor's hands. She did not growl or bristle, but she did not relax either. When Dr. Mercer reached to check the old mark around Vesper's neck, she paused, her brow creasing. "I've seen this before," she said. "Not the dog, the situation." She looked up at Cade. "Someone came in last week asking about a German Shepherd and 3 puppies. Older woman. Very worried." Cade felt a subtle shift inside him, the quiet click of something falling into place. He gave Dr. Mercer his name and number, and she wrote them down without comment, her expression thoughtful. The days that followed settled into a rhythm Cade had not expected to tolerate, much less welcome. Feedings every few hours, laundry, cleaning. Short walks along the edge of the forest where the ground was firm and quiet. Cade discovered that exhaustion from care was different from exhaustion born of vigilance. This kind left his muscles tired, but his mind strangely clear. Vesper adapted quickly. She learned the house's sounds, the creak of the porch step, the way the heater ticked when it shut off. At night, she positioned herself so she could see both the door and Cade. During the day, she followed him from room to room, never underfoot, always just far enough away to observe. It was on the 4th evening that the moment came, the one Cade would later recognize as the point where curiosity turned into something heavier. The sun had nearly set, staining the tops of the pines gold, when Vesper rose abruptly from her place beside the puppies. Her ears pricked forward, body going rigid. Cade looked up from the kitchen table, heart rate spiking out of reflex. "What is it?" he asked, though he already knew she would not answer. Vesper moved toward the front door, then stopped. She did not bark. Instead, she turned back to him and fixed him with a look so intent it bordered on unsettling. She took 2 steps toward him, then turned again toward the door, repeating the motion, precise and deliberate. Cade stood slowly, every sense sharpening. He opened the door and stepped onto the porch. The evening air was still. The trees stood unmoving. No headlights, no voices, nothing that should have warranted alarm. Yet Vesper remained tense, her gaze locked on the distant line of the road where it curved out of sight. For a long moment, Cade stood there with her, the quiet pressing in. Then, just as suddenly, Vesper relaxed. She stepped back inside, lay down beside the puppies, and exhaled, a deep, full breath she had not taken since arriving. Cade remained on the porch, unsettled. He did not believe in omens. He believed in patterns, in cause and effect. And something, he was certain, had just brushed the edge of both. That night, sleep came harder. Cade found himself listening for sounds that did not come. He replayed Dr. Mercer's words, the mention of an older woman, the worry implied there. He wondered what kind of argument ended with. Animals abandoned on a highway? What kind of person could do that and still look themselves in the mirror? Near midnight, he heard Vesper move again. This time she did not go to the door. She approached him quietly and sat, her shoulder pressing lightly against his knee. Cade rested his hand on her head without thinking. Her fur was warm, solid, undeniably real. "All right," he said softly, more to himself than to her. "We'll figure it out." Outside, Briar Hollow slept beneath the pines, unaware that something long buried had begun to surface, guided not by noise or force, but by the steady insistence of a dog who knew when to wait and when to act. 3 days after the visit to the veterinary clinic, the knock came just after noon, soft and deliberate, as if the person on the other side did not wish to disturb the house more than necessary. Cade was in the kitchen heating water, the puppies asleep in a loose knot of fur, and breath near the window where the winter sun reached them. Vesper rose at once, not with alarm, but with focused attention, her ears lifting, her body angling toward the door. Cade dried his hands on a towel and opened it. The woman standing on the porch looked older than 70, though not fragile. She was short and spare, her posture slightly stooped but not defeated, as if age had bent her without breaking her line. Her hair, a soft silver gray, was pulled back into a low bun that revealed a lined face and eyes the color of faded blue china, delicate at first glance, sharp if you looked longer. She wore a heavy olive wool coat buttoned to the throat, a cream scarf wrapped carefully around her neck, and sensible dark shoes dusted with dried salt from the road. Her hands were bare despite the cold, fingers pale and trembling, not from the temperature, but from restraint. She did not introduce herself. She did not step forward. She simply looked past Cade into the house and asked, in a voice barely louder than the wind in the pines, "Are they alive?" Cade held the door open. He studied her face the way he studied unfamiliar terrain, taking in the details that did not lie. The tension around her mouth, the way her eyes kept returning to the floor as if bracing for impact. He nodded once. "They are." The woman closed her eyes for a brief moment, the relief so immediate it seemed to hollow her out. When she opened them again, there was moisture there, but she did not let it fall. "Thank you," she said, as if the word had been waiting a long time to be used. Her name, she explained as Cade stepped aside to let her in, was Elwyn Hart. The name suited her, old-fashioned, careful, carrying the weight of continuity. Inside the house, she stopped just short of the living room, as though crossing fully into the space required permission she had not yet earned. Vesper approached her with measured steps and stopped an arm's length away, watching. Elwyn lowered herself slowly to one knee, the motion stiff but practiced, and extended her hand, palm down, allowing the dog to choose. Vesper sniffed, then placed her nose gently against Elwyn's fingers. The woman exhaled shakily and pressed her lips together, a soundless sob contained by will alone. She did not touch the puppies. She did not reach for the dog. She simply stayed there, breathing, as if proximity were enough for the moment. Elwyn's story emerged in pieces, not rehearsed but worn smooth by repetition. She had raised Vesper from a young dog, taken her in when a neighbor moved away and could not keep her. The puppies were born behind her small house on the edge of town, tucked beneath the porch where the wind could not reach. Elwyn had planned to keep them all, despite the cost, despite her son's objections. She spoke of the land her family had held for generations, of the pressure to sell, of arguments that started quietly and ended with doors slamming. Her son, Darren Hart, had taken the dogs one morning while she was at church. She described him without embellishment, a man in his early 40s, tall and well-groomed, with dark hair always neatly styled, and a smile that appeared easily when he needed it. He was polite to strangers, impatient with those who depended on him. Years earlier, after his father's death, something in him had hardened, as though grief had taught him to measure worth only in what could be secured and sold. He had told her the dogs were a liability, a distraction, a weakness. "I didn't know where he took them," Elwyn said, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "I looked everywhere I could. I asked at the shelter, at the clinic. I thought—" She stopped, swallowing. "I thought I might be too late." Cade listened without interrupting. He had learned that silence often carried more truth than questions. When Elowen finally looked up at him, her gaze held both hope and fear in equal measure. "I would like to take them home," she said, "if you'll allow it." Vesper shifted subtly, placing herself closer to the puppies. Cade noticed the movement, the instinctive calculation. He did not answer right away. He saw the love in Elowen's face, undeniable and unguarded. He also saw the caution there, the reflex of someone accustomed to being overridden. "I don't know enough yet," he said carefully. "Not about what happened, not about what could happen again." Elowen nodded, as if she had expected no other response. "I understand." She straightened, drawing dignity around herself like a cloak. "I won't force it. I only ask to see them, to help, if you'll let me." They agreed on terms that felt provisional and necessary. Elowen would visit during the day, help with feeding, cleaning, the small tasks that accumulated around fragile lives. The dogs would remain with Cade until there was clarity, until it was certain that no one would come to claim them with less care than they deserved. When Elowen stood to leave, she paused at the door and turned back. "You should know," she said quietly, "my son doesn't like to lose." After she left, the house seemed quieter than before. Cade stood at the window, watching her walk down the narrow path to the road, her figure swallowed gradually by the trees. He felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the sense that something had shifted underfoot. The phone rang just as the afternoon light began to fade. The number was blocked. Cade answered anyway. "This isn't your business," a man's voice said, low and controlled. No accent, no hurry. "You've been given a chance to walk away." The call ended before Cade could respond. He lowered the phone slowly, anger flaring and then subsiding into something colder. He did not need to be told twice what a warning sounded like. Behind him, Vesper rose, ears erect, body rigid. She had not heard the words, but she had felt the change. She moved to the door and stood there, watching the space Elowen had occupied minutes before, her tail still, her attention fixed. Cade followed her gaze and felt, again, that unsettling sense of alignment, as if events were arranging themselves without regard for his consent. That evening, as darkness settled over the pines, Vesper did something she had not done before. She approached Cade and nudged his hand insistently, then turned and walked to the corner of the room where the foam box had first been placed. She lowered herself there and lay with her head resting against the wall, eyes on him, unblinking. The gesture felt deliberate, symbolic in a way Cade could not articulate, as though she were marking a boundary, drawing a line between what had been and what would not be allowed again. Cade sat across from her long into the night, the weight of choice pressing in. He understood now that the dogs were not lost by accident. They had been removed, and someone out there did not appreciate their return. He did not yet know Darren Hart, or the shape his interference would take. He only knew that the plea he had answered on the highway was not finished asking. Elowen Hart returned on a gray morning when the sky sat low over the pines and the air smelled of snow that hadn't yet decided to fall. She arrived with the same careful knock as before, her posture straight despite the weight she carried, a folder tucked under one arm, as if it were something she might drop if she held it too loosely. Cade opened the door to find her composed but pale, her silver hair pinned neatly back, her olive coat buttoned with a precision that suggested nerves disguised as order. "I've been thinking," she said once inside, her voice steady in a way that felt rehearsed, "about a better arrangement." She waited until he nodded before continuing, glancing toward Vesper, who lay near the puppies with her head lifted, eyes following Elowen's movements. Elowen took a breath. "There's a small house not far from here, empty, close enough that I could walk, close enough that you wouldn't be alone with the responsibility. I can cover it, for the dogs." Cade did not answer right away. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed, studying the woman across from him. Elwyn lived simply. He had seen her shoes worn at the heel, the careful way she folded her scarf. She did not look like someone who could casually acquire property, even a modest one. "You said your son handles most of the finances," Cade said quietly. Elwyn's mouth tightened for a fraction of a second before smoothing again. "Family money," she replied. "Old arrangements." The explanation landed wrong. Cade had learned to trust the sensation that followed such moments, the subtle resistance in his chest that told him a story was incomplete. He did not press her. Not yet. Word traveled quickly in Briar Hollow. By the end of the week, people were already talking about the little house up the hill, about the retired soldier and the dogs and the older woman who had stepped in with unexpected means. Cade felt the shift when he went into town, the way conversations paused and resumed just out of earshot. He heard it in the diner's quiet glances, in the way the clerk at the hardware store lingered a moment longer than necessary. The house itself was unremarkable at first glance. One story, pale siding, a shallow porch facing the woods. It sat on a slight rise, trees crowding close as if trying to reclaim it. Cade walked the property slowly, boots crunching on gravel, eyes tracing the lines of the roof, the windows, the narrow driveway. It was clean. Too clean. No weeds, no signs of long neglect. He asked questions. Not directly, not in ways that would raise suspicion. A comment here, an observation there. It took less than a day to learn that the purchase had been handled quietly, paperwork pushed through faster than usual. The name attached to the deed did not belong to a Lowen Hart, Northbridge Holdings. Cade stood at his kitchen table that evening, the name written on a scrap of paper, his jaw set. He had heard of companies like Northbridge before, developers with polished brochures and promises of renewal who spoke of opportunity while circling land like patient predators. He pulled up public records on his laptop, the glow of the screen harsh in the dim room. Northbridge had been buying parcels around Briar Hollow for months, often through intermediaries, often at prices that suggested urgency. Vesper shifted uneasily as he worked. She rose from her place and paced the length of the room, then stopped at the window, staring toward the hill where the new house stood. Her ears flattened briefly, a low sound vibrating in her chest, so quiet Cade almost missed it. "Easy," he murmured, though his own pulse had begun to match her tension. That night, sleep came in shallow waves. Cade woke before dawn with the sensation of being watched, the old reflex surging up without permission. He reached for his phone, then stopped. The room was silent, except for the steady breathing of the puppies. Vesper stood at the window again, her silhouette rigid against the faint light. He followed her gaze and noticed, for the first time, a pinpoint glimmer under the eaves of the new house. A brief reflection, gone as soon as he focused on it. The discovery came the next afternoon. Cade walked up the hill alone, his movements unhurried, his attention wide. The air was cold enough to sting. He circled the house once, then again, eyes scanning. When he reached the back corner beneath the overhang, he saw it clearly. A small camera, no larger than a thumb joint, mounted just out of casual sight, angled toward the driveway and the path leading back to his own place. He crouched there for a long moment, the world narrowing to the hum of blood in his ears. This was not generosity. It was surveillance. As Cade reached up to examine the camera more closely, Vesper appeared at his side without warning, her presence sudden and solid. She pressed against his leg, not to hide, but to anchor. Then she did something unexpected. She sat, perfectly straight, two front paws pressed together, mirroring the posture she had held on the highway days before. The message landed with a weight that made Cade still. This was not fear. This was recognition. He lowered his hand and stepped back, leaving the camera untouched. That evening, Elwyn returned, carrying a bag of supplies and a carefully composed smile. Cade watched her, as she spoke of schedules and feeding rotations, of how relieved she was that help was coming. Her words were kind. Her eyes were tired. "Who arranged the purchase?" Cade asked gently, waiting until she finished. Elowen faltered. The silence stretched between them, thick and fragile. Finally she sat, folding her hands in her lap as if to keep them from shaking. "I didn't," she admitted. "Not entirely." She told him then about the pressure that had mounted over the past year, about men who came with offers and smiles that never reached their eyes, about contracts she did not fully understand, and a company, Northbridge, that had positioned itself as savior while tightening its grip. The house had been part of the arrangement, framed as help, as proof of goodwill, a way to make her son see reason. "I thought if the dogs were safe, if you were involved, it would slow him down," she said, her voice thin. "I didn't know about the camera." Cade believed her. He had learned to recognize genuine fear, and this was it. Quiet, exhausted, threaded with shame. When she left, the house felt heavier, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the truth. Cade sat alone, the folder of documents open before him, Northbridge's name stamped in careful ink. He understood now that the gift was a lever, and he was meant to be part of its fulcrum. Outside, night settled over the pines. Vesper returned to the window, watching the hill, her body taut but controlled. Cade joined her, resting a hand on her back. Together they stood in the dim light, two sentinels, facing a future that had revealed its first sharp edge. The house had been offered as help, but help, Cade knew, was rarely free. Darren Hart arrived on a clear afternoon that carried the brittle calm of early winter. Cade saw him first from the kitchen window, a tall man stepping out of a dark sedan parked just short of the drive, coat collar turned up more for effect than warmth. Darren moved with the ease of someone accustomed to being welcomed, shoulders back, chin lifted, a practiced smile already forming before he reached the porch. He looked like a man who had learned early how to pass inspections without ever submitting to them. Up close, the resemblance to Elowen was faint but present, the same pale blue eyes, though Darren's held a colder light, quick to measure advantage. His hair was dark and neatly combed, not a strand out of place, his face clean-shaven, jawline sharp enough to suggest control rather than strength. He wore a charcoal wool coat over a black turtleneck and dark trousers, polished shoes unsuited for gravel. Everything about him signaled order imposed, not earned. "Mr. Rourke," Darren said warmly, extending a hand as if they were meeting under ordinary circumstances. "I'm Darren Hart. I've come for the dogs." Vesper rose before Cade could answer. She stepped forward, placing herself squarely between Darren and the doorway, her body low but steady, ears forward, eyes fixed. It was not a snarl. It was a boundary. Darren's smile tightened for a fraction of a second, a flicker so brief it would have passed unnoticed by anyone less attentive. "You see?" he said lightly, withdrawing his hand. "This is what I mean. My mother is attached, but she doesn't understand how dangerous this can get. She's being taken advantage of." Cade leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "She asked for help. That's not the same thing." Darren exhaled, as if burdened by patience. "She's 73. She doesn't make the best decisions anymore." His gaze slid to Vesper, then to the house beyond. "These dogs are a complication, a liability. They need to go somewhere appropriate." Vesper did not move. One of the puppies stirred behind her, a small sound that seemed to echo too loudly in the quiet afternoon. Cade felt the familiar clarity settle in, the narrowing of focus that came when a line was drawn. "They're not going anywhere," he said. "Not with you." The anger surfaced then, sharp and unmasked. Darren's mouth thinned, his eyes hardening. "You don't belong here," he said quietly, the warmth gone. "This town doesn't need you playing hero." Cade watched him carefully, cataloging the shift. When Darren stepped back, schooling his expression, the damage had already been done. The mask had slipped. Darren turned without another word and walked back to his car, gravel crunching beneath shoes that had never been meant for it. That evening, Cade sat at the table long after dark, papers spread out before him. He did not investigate the way movies suggested, no dramatic confrontations, no shortcuts. He followed patterns. He traced connections. Northbridge Holdings appeared again and again, its name threaded through shell companies and limited partnerships that circled Elowen's land like quiet vultures. Darren's name surfaced where signatures were needed, where persuasion was applied close to home. Cade did not try to be a lawyer. He found someone who could speak that language fluently. Mara Winslow met him at the diner the next morning, sliding into the booth across from him with a notebook already open. She was in her mid-30s, sharp-featured, with short auburn hair tucked behind her ears and eyes that missed very little. She wore a heavy black puffer jacket and boots scuffed from fieldwork, the uniform of someone who preferred facts to appearances. "I hear you've got a developer problem," she said without preamble. Cade appreciated the efficiency. He laid out what he knew, keeping emotion out of it. Mara listened, pen moving quickly, her expression thoughtful. "Northbridge doesn't like daylight," she said. "If they're pushing through Darren, it means they want the land cheap and quiet." "And the dogs?" Cade asked. Mara's mouth curved into something grim. "Pressure, leverage. People think cruelty is loud. Most of the time it's subtle." Cade was in the living room when the sound shattered the calm, a sharp crack followed by the tinkling collapse of glass. He was on his feet before the echo faded, heart slamming into readiness. Vesper launched forward, not toward the broken window, but toward the back of the house. Cade followed, boots hitting the floor in controlled strides. Outside, the night smelled of frost and pine. Vesper did not bark. She sprinted straight into the darkness, her path decisive. Cade reached the edge of the yard just in time to see a shadow retreating between the trees, the faint crunch of hurried steps giving away a direction rather than a face. He did not chase. He memorized the angle, the distance, the timing. When he returned inside, Vesper stood by the shattered window, her posture calm, eyes alert. The puppies whimpered softly, startled but unharmed. Cade knelt, checking them, then rose and surveyed the damage. One rock, one message. The next day the town buzzed. Some people offered help. Others watched from a distance, curiosity edged with caution. Darren did not return, but his presence lingered in the form of questions and whispers. Cade met Mara again, this time with photographs and timelines. She nodded, already assembling a story that could not be ignored. "This won't be quick," she warned, "but it'll be public." "That's the point," Cade said. That night, as the house settled into uneasy quiet, Vesper lay near the puppies, her body relaxed, but her eyes open. Cade sat nearby, the weight of responsibility heavy but familiar. He had not come to Briar Hollow to fight, but some fights, he knew, arrived regardless. And when they did, erasure was never the answer. The forest behind Cade's house did not look dangerous at first glance. It never did. The pines stood tall and evenly spaced, their trunks straight as pillars, their needles muting sound and light. Snow had not yet fallen, but the ground held the cold, stiff with frost beneath the leaves. It was the kind of place people underestimated because it looked orderly, because it did not announce its risks. Vesper stepped into it without hesitation. She moved ahead of Cade at a steady pace, not running, not sniffing aimlessly, her head low and her tail still. At 5 years old, she was fully grown, her black and tan coat thick and weathered, her body lean from a life that had not allowed softness. Each step she took was deliberate, angled slightly left of the narrow game trail that threaded between the trees, as if she were following a map only she could read. Cade followed, boots crunching softly, senses open. He carried no weapon in his hands, only a flashlight clipped to his belt and a phone in his pocket. This was not a mission in the old sense. There were no orders, no extraction plan, only a direction that felt inevitable. He had learned over the years to distinguish between fear and warning. Fear rushed. Warning waited. Vesper had waited. All morning she had paced the house, stopping at the same spot by the window, returning to it with increasing insistence. When Cade finally stood and said, "Show me," she had not looked back. She had simply gone. They walked for nearly 20 minutes before the trees thinned. The air changed first, metallic, stale. Then Cade saw it, a low structure half hidden by brush, its corrugated metal roof dulled by rust, its wooden door warped and swollen. An old storage shed, the kind left behind when land changed hands and memory outlasted purpose. Vesper stopped 10 yards short of the door. She did not approach. She planted herself, legs braced, eyes fixed. Cade felt the hair along his arms rise. Inside, the smell hit him, immediately. Dust, oil, old paper. He swept the flashlight across the space, heart rate climbing not with panic, but with recognition. Stacked crates, a folding table. On it, folders weighed down by a brick, a portable hard drive, 2 small cameras identical to the one he'd found under the eaves of the house on the hill. This was not improvisation. This was planning. Cade flipped through the documents carefully. Contracts with dense legal language. Maps of parcels surrounding Briar Hollow. Illiwan's land outlined in red. Emails printed and highlighted. Darren's name appearing often enough to establish a pattern, not enough to look careless. There were copies of surveillance stills, grainy images of a Lowen's porch, Cade's driveway, timestamps precise. A sound behind him snapped his attention outward. Voices. 2, maybe 3. Footsteps approaching too fast for comfort. "Out the back," Cade whispered, but Vesper did not move. She shifted instead, positioning herself between the door and the narrow exit at the rear of the shed. Not blocking Cade, blocking the path. Darren's voice cut through the quiet, sharp with urgency. "It should be here. Don't touch anything." He appeared in the doorway moments later, coat open now, hair disheveled, the polish from earlier encounters stripped away by haste. Behind him stood a second man Cade did not recognize, mid-40s, broad, beard trimmed close to the jaw, wearing a dark jacket that did not belong in the woods. His eyes flicked constantly, assessing angles, distances. A contractor of pressure, not violence. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Darren saw Cade. The anger came first, raw and unfiltered. "You shouldn't be here," he said, breath coming fast. "This doesn't concern you." Cade stepped forward, placing himself fully in view. "It concerns Elawan," he said evenly, "and it concerns those dogs." Darren laughed, a short, brittle sound. "You think this ends well for you?" He took a step forward, then slipped, boots skidding on the frost-slick ground. The moment broke his momentum, his confidence fracturing just enough for the truth to show. Vesper seized that moment, not with teeth, not with force. She moved sideways, her body cutting off the exit behind Darren, her stance wide and immovable. She barked once, low and sharp, a command more than a threat. The second man swore and backed up, heart rate spiking. "Darren, we need to go." Darren's gaze flicked between Cade, the dog, the scattered papers. Panic began to leak through the cracks. He lunged instead of thinking, reaching for the table, knocking documents to the floor. Cade reacted instinctively, grabbing Darren's arm, the motion practiced and restrained. They stumbled, boots sliding, the shed suddenly too small for the weight of years pressing in. A cry cut through the chaos. "Elawan!" She had appeared at the edge of the clearing, drawn by noise, by fear, by a sense she could not ignore. She was pale, breathless, her coat unbuttoned, one hand gripping a tree for balance. Darren turned toward her, shock flashing across his face. "Mom, get back!" he shouted, but the warning came too late. Elowen's foot slipped on the uneven ground, and she went down hard, the fall knocking the air from her lungs. Cade released Darren instantly and moved, reaching Elowen in 2 strides, bracing her before she could roll. She clutched his sleeve, eyes wide, pain and realization colliding in her expression. "I'm sorry," she whispered, though it was unclear to whom. The second man bolted. Darren hesitated, torn between anger and self-preservation. Vesper advanced 1 step, holding his gaze. She did not growl. She did not bare her teeth. She waited. Darren broke. He turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush, leaving behind paper and proof and the echo of his own breath. By the time Cade helped Elowen to her feet, the forest had swallowed them. They did not chase. Cade knew when to let consequences catch up on their own terms. Later that afternoon, Mara Winslow's article went live. She did not embellish. She did not soften. She laid out the documents, the maps, the surveillance. She named Northbridge Holdings and outlined the pattern of acquisition and coercion. She described the pressure placed on elderly landowners, the use of family members as leverage. She included photographs, clear, undeniable. Briar Hollow reacted the way small towns always did when the quiet finally broke. Shock first, then anger, then the slow, determined work of accountability. Cade sat on his porch that evening, Vesper at his feet, the puppies asleep inside. The forest was calm again, the pines unmoved by human revelation. Elawan rested inside, shaken but safe, wrapped in a blanket and silence. Mara called once, her voice tired but resolute. "This is just the beginning," she said. "I know," Cade replied. As the light faded, Vesper lifted her head and looked towards you, the woods one last time. Then she lay down, tension easing from her frame. Whatever she had been waiting for, whatever line she had drawn, had been crossed. Instinct had led them here. The rest would follow. The official investigation began without ceremony. There were no flashing lights outside Cade's house, no dramatic press conferences on the courthouse steps. It started quietly, the way truth often did in Briar Hollow, through phone calls made behind closed doors, files requested, names written down and underlined. Northbridge Holdings froze its local operations within 48 hours, citing internal review. It was a phrase meant to buy time. It did not buy silence. Darren Hart was taken in the following week on charges of intimidation and coercion, his arrest carried out without spectacle. The town watched from windows and doorways as he was led into a cruiser, his face pale, his jaw set, still trying to look like a man in control of his own story. Cade did not attend the hearing. He learned the outcome later from Mara Winslow, who called with the clipped calm of someone used to letting facts speak louder than satisfaction. "It's moving," she said. "Slow, but forward." That's the best kind. Her voice carried exhaustion and something like relief. She had spent years chasing smaller stories, stories that never quite changed anything. This one had weight. It had witnesses. There was no celebration in the days that followed. Only adjustment. The little house on the hill, once a symbol of leverage, sat empty, its windows reflecting pine and sky. Cade walked up there one afternoon with Elowen, the gravel crunching under their shoes, the air bright with late-season sun. Elowen moved more slowly now, a cane in her right hand, her posture still careful but no longer folded inward. She wore a soft blue cardigan under her coat, her silver hair neatly pinned back, her face calmer than Cade had ever seen it. "I don't want to sell," she said simply, stopping at the porch. I won't be pushed again. Cade nodded. You don't have to decide everything today. They stood together for a moment, listening to the wind thread through the trees. The house felt different now, not cleansed exactly, but honest. The cameras had been removed, the documents seized. What remained was structure and space waiting for purpose. The decision came not as a revelation, but as a continuation. Cade offered to keep the house, to maintain it as a place of refuge. Small, quiet, experimental. Not a shelter with rules and forms, but a holding place for what the system overlooked, animals discarded, elders pressured into corners they did not choose. Elwyn agreed without hesitation, her eyes brightening with something like recognition. She had lived long enough to know when a thing deserved tending. They started modestly. Repairs first. Fresh paint on the porch rails. New locks. A ramp built along one side, sturdy and gentle in its slope. Elwyn came every morning with a thermos of tea and the habit of someone relearning what safety felt like. She moved through the space-touching walls, straightening objects that did not need it, leaving small signs of presence behind. She laughed more than she spoke, a light sound that surprised her as much as anyone. Vesper claimed the porch as her station. She lay there in the afternoons, stretched out beneath the sun, her black and tan coat warming, her head lifted just enough to watch the path. At 5 years old, she had the settled confidence of a dog who knew her place. She no longer paced at night. She no longer startled at distant sounds. The house and the hill had aligned with her instincts at last. The puppies grew the way puppies did, quickly, unevenly, as if trying out different versions of themselves. Micah stayed close to Elwyn, dark eyes attentive, a thinker. Pip was a scatter of motion, chasing leaves, discovering his bark as though it were a new toy. Junie preferred the shade, watching from beneath the porch steps, her pale chest patch flashing when she finally decided to join the others. Cade found himself learning their rhythms without effort, his days shaped by feedings and walks and the simple necessity of being present. Cade was locking up the main house when Vesper rose from the porch and stood very still, her body angled toward the road. Elwyn paused mid-step, hand on the railing. A car approached slowly, headlights dimmed, tires rolling careful over gravel. It stopped short of the drive. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a woman stepped out. She was younger than Elwyn, perhaps in her early 40s, tall and slender, her dark hair pulled back in a loose knot that exposed a tired but determined face. Her skin was pale from long indoor days, her eyes shadowed with worry rather than age. She held a folder to her chest like a shield. When she spoke, her voice carried hesitation and resolve in equal measure. "I was told this was a place that helped," she said. "I don't know if that's true, but I didn't know where else to go." Vesper watched her without hostility, her tail low but relaxed. Cade felt the shift then, the subtle turning of a key. This was what the house was becoming, not a solution, but a threshold. They listened. They did not promise anything. They offered a chair, a cup of tea, the simple dignity of being heard. When the woman left later that night, shoulders lighter, Vesper returned to her place on the porch and lay down, her duty complete. Winter came gently. Snow fell in thin, patient layers, transforming the hill into something clean and quiet. The investigation continued its work elsewhere, unseen but steady. Northbridge's presence receded. Darren did not return. Briar Hollow adjusted, the way towns always did, slowly, imperfectly, but forward. On a clear morning, Cade stood at the edge of the porch, breath fogging the air, watching Vesper and the dogs move through the yard. Elwyn joined him, her cane tapping softly against the boards. "They call it something now," she said, nodding toward the house. "You know that?" Cade raised an eyebrow. "Do they?" "Vesper?" "House," Elowen said, smiling, "not because of miracles, because of trust." Cade considered that, the words settling into place. He thought of the highway, of the moment he had nearly driven on. He thought of the forest, of documents scattered like leaves, of fear confronted and left behind. He understood then what had changed, not the world, not even the town, but the distance between himself and it. He had not saved the dogs to find meaning. He had saved them because he could not ignore a plea. They, in turn, had refused to let him disappear. As the sun climbed and the day unfolded, Vesper lifted her head and looked back at him once, amber eyes steady and knowing. Cade nodded in return, the exchange simple and complete. In Briar Hollow, they said the place on the hill was where the rescued learned to save again. And for the first time in a long while, Cade believed that was enough. Sometimes the miracle is not thunder from the sky, but a quiet interruption on an ordinary road. A dog that refuses to leave. A tired heart that stops long enough to listen. If God still moves in the world, he often does it through small mercies we almost miss. An open door, a steady hand, a second chance that arrives wearing fur instead of fame. In daily life, most of us don't face the kind of choices that make headlines. We face the slower, braver ones, calling someone back when pride says, "Don't," showing kindness when nobody is watching, protecting what is vulnerable even when it costs us comfort. Those moments may feel small, but heaven measures differently. Love is never wasted. Compassion is never forgotten. And sometimes the very thing you rescue becomes the reason you keep living with purpose. If this story touched you, share it with someone who might need a reminder that hope can still find a way home. Leave a comment and tell where you're watching from, or share a time when you felt God's guidance in a moment that seemed ordinary. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chapter. May God bless you and your home with peace, protect the ones you love, and place the right people and the right miracles in your path exactly when you need them most.